It's been a little bit since I reviewed something from Hammer, so today I'm gonna change that with 1957's The Curse of Frankenstein. One night, a priest visits an ailing in health, seemingly, Baron Victor Frankenstein, played by Peter Cushing, who proceeds to tell the priest, his life story. So here's the setup. At 15 years old, Victor's mother suddenly passes away, and he gets the entirety of the estate and gets called Baron. He uses that money to pay a tutor named Paul Krempe, played by Robert Urquhart. Sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but whatever. Paul takes Victor under his wing, and over the next 2 years, Victor learns a lot, and soon they start collaborating on trying to bring back entities from their dead. Their first project is a cute little puppy, and it works. So Victor suggests, well, if it works on dogs, why don't we work it on humans too? He finds a robber's corpse hung on a gibbet. Yeah, apparently that's what they hung on robbers sometimes. Then he purchases hands and eyes from Charnel workers, and finally invites an old scientist over. He takes him up to his room and lures him to his death. How? He forces him to look into a painting, then makes him step back, and then pushes him over the stair banister before he falls on his head, killing him.
Look out, Professor, look out!
After Victor takes out the brain from the doctor's body, Paul immediately starts getting suspicious and tries to take the brain away from Victor, inadvertently damaging it in the process. Victor repairs it, throws it into the creature, and at 50 minutes in, Dracula himself, Christopher Lee, finally appears. A little trivia, this is actually the first time Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing actually share the same scene together, and this will mark the beginning of a 37-year friendship. Unfortunately, the creature starts strangling Victor, causing Paul to go after him and eventually chuck him in the head with a stool, briefly incapacitating him. Victor reluctantly locks up the creature under Paul's advice, but somehow it manages to break free of its restraints and go to the woods where he kills an old blind man. Paul grabs a gun and later shoots the creature in the eye, killing him. Later, Victor and Paul bury the creature, but when Paul leaves town, Victor decides to be sneaky and decides to dig up the creature. Since word travels fast. Victor's maid, Justine, played by Valerie Gaunt, who you may remember from my horror Dracula review, claims that she is pregnant with Victor's child, because weird stuff, and threatens to tell the authorities about Victor's experiments if she does not marry him. As she investigates the lab, Justine finds herself in the clutches of the monster, who promptly decides to kill her. The monster then climbs up onto the roof of the manor and holds Frankenstein's wife / cousin. You gotta remember, this movie took place like 100 years before the movie was released. Anyways, the wife's name is Elizabeth, played by Hazel Court. Victor grabs an old-style pistol and tries to shoot the monster, but inadvertently shoots Elizabeth. With no bullets left, he grabs an oil lamp and chucks it at the monster's face, causing him to burn in agony and fall in a tub of acid, destroying all evidence that the creature existed. Unfortunately, the priest does not believe his story, and Paul and Elizabeth go to visit Victor one more time before he's sent to the guillotine to be executed. Overall, the story's pretty solid, the effects hold up pretty well, especially today, and I'm just glad to see Christopher Lee back again, as well as Peter Cushing. Overall, I'll rate this movie a 9.5 out of 10. Go check it out if you can. It's amazing. So how long ago did I review The Curse of Frankenstein? Oh shit, a little over a month and a half ago. Well, better late than never, am I right? Because today we're going to be reviewing The Revenge of Frankenstein, released in 1958. We pick up where the last movie left off, with Baron Victor Frankenstein, once again being played by Peter Cushing, about to be executed by the guillotine, but instead, with the assistance of a hunchback named Carl, played by Oscar Kwiatek, a priest is executed in Victor's place. 3 years later, Victor is now in Carlsbrook under the alias Dr. Stein, and caters to both the rich and the poor in the city. It is also there where Victor meets a young member of the city's medical council, Hans Cleve, played by Francis Matthews, who asks to be Victor's apprentice, to which he approves. Victor decides instead of a messed up creature like the last movie, he decides to put Carl in a healthy body. Oh yeah, you know this, Carl? You're going under the knife. Actually, scratch that. He knew, and he's more than willing to go under the knife. After having his brain transplanted into a new body, this time played by Michael Gwynn, the transplant is a success and he's taken to a hospital, but is strapped down to the foot. Once he's told that he's a sensation, Carl panics and tries to escape, but due to the straps, well, he can't. So he tries to get the help of a girl named Margaret, played by Eunice Gayson, who lets him free. A little while later, he flees to Victor's laboratory and tries to burn his old body as an old janitor appears and tries to kill him. It wouldn't take half a brain to know that wouldn't work, Janny. Meanwhile, Hans and Victor discover that, well, Carl's gone. The next morning, Margaret goes to her aunt's stable and finds Hans there and tries to tell Victor and Hans, but he tells her not to. She goes anyway, thankfully only for Hans, but when they return, Carl's gone missing. We skip ahead to that night, where Carl looks like he's aged 30 or 40 years, but anyway, he strangles a local girl before heading to a wedding reception, or at least some sort of reception, and exposes Frankenstein's real name before he dies on the spot. Due to this, Hans pleads Frankenstein to leave the country, but he refuses, even going against the medical council that he's not Frankenstein. Unfortunately, when they dig up his grave, which we know that it's not his, they find out that it is indeed that Frankenstein is still alive. When Frankenstein returns to the poor hospital, he is almost immediately beaten to death. Hans barely manages to save him and transplant his brain into another body that somehow looks exactly like him. The police show up to arrest Victor, but Hans shows them his body and they leave. A little while later, Hans and Victor relocate to London, where the latter is going under the pseudonym Dr. Frank. Overall, I'd say the acting is good, characters are great, and there's actually some emotional weight with Carl's story about being a hunchback and having, Margaret as his crush. Overall, I'll rate this movie a 9.3 out of 10. Well, I just finished watching The Evil of Frankenstein from 1964, and I am not amused. Forced to leave town after body snatching, Baron Victor Frankenstein, not the same one from The Curse of Frankenstein and The Revenge of Frankenstein, once again played by Peter Cushing, and his assistant, Hans, played by Sandor Iles, moves to Carlsbad to sell some stuff and get some money to start over. Unfortunately, the things are stolen. After Victor and Hans move to a new castle, the former tells the latter the story of how he created a monster in, no joke, a 10-minute flashback. Bro, we do not want to see that long of a flashback, dude. During this flashback, we get our first look at the monster, played by Kiwi Kingston, who looks so stupid. It looks like Boris Karloff. The reason is, this was actually a co-production between Hammer and Universal Universal allowed Hammer the rights to make a monster similar to the likeness of Boris Karloff. Anyway, Victor and Hans break into the local burgomaster's apartment and try to steal their stuff back, but the police catch them, but fortunately, they manage to escape. They go to a cave thanks to a mute girl who does next to nothing in the entire damn movie. Anyway, they find the monster and try to melt the ice surrounding it before taking it back to the lab and reviving it. Unfortunately, the monster does not respond to Victor's commands, and so he enlists the help of a hypnotist named Zoltan, played by Peter Withrope, and realizing that he can take control of the monster, he uses that to his advantage by killing all the authorities in the town. Unfortunately, Zoltan hurts the monster, and enraged, Victor kicks him out, but Zoltan returns shortly later, only for the monster to stab him in the chest, killing him almost instantly. Unfortunately for Victor, he is arrested but is set free after the truth finally comes out. Meanwhile, the monster's head is hurting, well, because he has a brick for a goddamn head. But he's in so much pain that he wrecks the lab, setting it on fire and killing him and Frankenstein in it. Overall, the monster looks stupid, the character development is terrible, and the plot does not move on until like 45 minutes in, although I will admit, Frankenstein and Zoltan are the only saving graces. Overall, I'll give this movie a 3 out of 10. It's not Superfly TNT bad, but it's bad. Numero Quattro in our Hammer Frankenstein-a-thon, Frankenstein Created Woman, released in 1967. So we start off on kind of a weird note with a random guy being guillotined. Well, you might be asking, what does this have to do with Frankenstein? Well, let's just say his son watches from afar and gets mentally messed up. We skip ahead a few years, where Hans, played here by Robert Morris, and a doctor named Hertz, played by Thorley Walters, are trying to resurrect Frankenstein, once again, played by Peter Cushing. And he's apparently been like this for a whole hour. Well, how? Well, apparently this movie is connected to the Evil of Frankenstein, according to what I read on Wikipedia. But wait, if we saw how he died in his castle exploding, how would they have been able to get his body, put him in ice, and then revive him within an hour? Movie logic makes no sense sometimes. Anyway, Hans is the lover of a bar girl named Christina, played by Susan Denberg, who unfortunately has a very scarred face. But who cares? She's so beautiful, am I right? Am I right? Unfortunately, a trio of dudes don't, and constantly mock Christina, much to Hans' anger, and so he beats them up, even slicing one of them in the face. That night, the jackasses go to steal wine, and when the bartender, aka Christina's father, catches them in the act, they beat him to death. But unfortunately, like most movie villains during this time in the movie, they don't get repercussions. Unfortunately, Hans is the victim of this here, being caught by the police and accused of murder, which we all know he didn't do. Despite Baron Victor Frankenstein and Dr. Hertz's accusations against the crime, Hans is unfortunately executed, right in front of Christina, who commits suicide shortly after. Frankenstein and Hertz take the bodies of Hans and Christina, takes the soul from Hans's body, and puts it into Christina. An hour in, she's fully active, but she doesn't remember her past life. Over the next 30 minutes, Hans' soul takes full possession of Christina, who kills the three jackasses, before eventually committing suicide for a second time, much to Baron Victor Frankenstein's horror. And he seemingly walks away, seemingly learning a moral lesson. Overall, the story is great and somewhat tragic, focusing on Christina, and the acting's pretty good, per usual. Overall, I'll rate this movie an 8 out of 10. Next up, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, released in 1969, and I gotta say, it's probably the best in the series thus far. So we start off with the guy getting his head cut off screen, and a thief being attacked by a masked man in the lab. Well, what do these events have to do with this movie? Yep, Frankenstein is back, once again, played by Peter Cushing. The thief goes to the authorities to report Frankenstein while he gets rid of the evidence. He goes to a boarding house under the name Dr. Fenner, run by a girl named Anna Spangler, played by the beautiful Veronica Carlson. And we also meet Anna's fiancé, Carl, played by Simon Ward, who's trying to steal some narcotics from an asylum that he works at to help Anna get the funds to treat her mother. Unfortunately for them, Frankenstein finds out and blackmails him by making Carl work for him. The first thing they do is go to the asylum that Carl works at and try to kidnap Frankenstein's former assistant, Frederick Brandt, played by George Pravda, and eventually kidnap him. They then take out the brain of Brandt and put into another guy named Richter, played by Freddie Jones. All the while, Frankenstein rapes Anna.
Get out!
Nah, seriously, Frankenstein rapes her. Apparently, Peter Cushing, Veronica Carlson, and the director of this movie, Terrence Fisher, didn't even want to do it. But apparently, the executive at Hammer, James Carreras, thought it would be a good idea to add that in. This guy clearly has problems. And apparently, the reason for this scene is, or at least what Terrence Fisher tried to make it as, is because you hate Frankenstein even more. The irony is not lost on me. A little while later, Brandt's wife, Ella, played by Maxine Audley, comes to visit him. Frankenstein tells her that he's been cured. What he doesn't tell her is that it ain't the same body. Once she leaves, Frankenstein packs up and moves again, but unfortunately, Brandt's original body has been discovered. Brandt, under a different body, wakes up and tries to ask Hannah for help, but she unfortunately stabs him. In his rage, Frankenstein discovers this and violently stabs Anna in the stomach, killing her almost instantly. Brandt returns to find Ella, but unfortunately, due to being in a different body, she doesn't take too kindly to him. Wanting revenge, Brandt sets a house on fire, letting his wife go free before Frankenstein arrives. Brandt tells him that the formula for his experiments is in her study, but before he can reach there, Brandt sets the house on fire. Frankenstein escapes, but Carl, who's been following him, knocks him over and gets into a brief wrestling match with him. Then, Brandt knocks Carl out. In a heroic moment for his series, Brandt carries Frankenstein on his shoulders and puts him back in the fire, consuming them both and killing them. Minus that one scene, which you'll find 47 minutes in if you were wondering, the movie is pretty much perfect. Overall, I rate this movie a flat out 10 out of 10. Go check it out if you can. It is amazing. For 3 months, I've been thinking that Superfly TNT is the worst movie ever made. But this one, it's pretty damn close. We're reviewing The Horror of Frankenstein, released in 1970, released on a double bill with Scars of Dracula, but unlike that film, which is pretty memorable, this one is absolute garbage. So basically what happens is Victor Frankenstein, this time played by Ralph Bates, tries to get into the study of anatomy, much to the chagrin of his father. And so as revenge, he sabotages his gun, and let's just say the father dies. He attends his funeral, but then goes to study in Vienna. But unfortunately, he's kicked out after he impregnates the dean's daughter. Okay, what? A little while later, still wanting to study anatomy, Victor hires his old friend Wilhelm, played by Graham James, and he shows him what he can do. He first briefly makes an arm come back to life with electricity, and then moves on to another friend's tortoise. Seeing future opportunities, Victor hires a grave robber, kills his assistant, and kills one of his friend's fathers. Finally, at about an hour and 7 or 8 minutes in, the monster, played by David Prowse, is finally awakened. Unfortunately, he doesn't do much other than just stare with a Saint blank expression and just murder people. Not an interesting monster if you were to ask me. One of the victims is Victor's maid, Elise, played by Kate O'Mara, and she's violently strangled to death. The same fate almost happens to a little girl, and the same friend I've been mentioned to a lot, Elizabeth, played by Veronica Carlson. But she's freed, and the little girl plays with some of the tools and melts the monster with the acid setup. Overall, the movie moves at a very slow pace, the acting is pretty subpar, and the monster looks terrible. Overall, I rate this movie a 2.5 out of 10. Well, we're finally here. The seventh and last, but most certainly not least, installment in the Hammer Frankenstein series, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, released in 1974. And I gotta say, it is eons better than Horror Frankenstein. So the plot essentially goes like this. A young surgeon, Simon Helder, played by Shane Bryant, is what you would call Frankenstein's biggest fan. But unfortunately, he gets caught doing some illegal things, murdering people and that stuff, and gets sentenced to 5 years in an insane asylum. And when he gets there, Simon gets sprayed by a high pressure water hose and even bleeds out, only being saved by the presence of, well, I think you know it just again. Once again, played by Peter Cushing, going under the alias Carl Victor. And you might be asking why Peter Cushing looks old and frail. Well, not only is it because of the fact that he's 61, but unfortunately, in 1971, Peter Cushing lost his wife. I would like to give my moment of silence to her and Peter Cushing, who died in 1994, 20 years after this movie was released. Alright, let's continue. Frankenstein takes Simon under his wing and, along with Frankenstein's assistant, Sarah Angel Klaus, played by Madeline Smith, the two set out on a new experiment. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to Sarah and Simon, Frankenstein just goes out and kills random people for his experiments, all in the name of science. Frankenstein's experiment is the monster known as Herr Schneider, played by David Prowse, the only actor to play more than one monster in the Frankenstein series. And he's a homicidal inmate who is being kept alive even after trying to kill himself. Oh, and did I forget to mention, this movie is actually a sequel to Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. We know this because Frankenstein is telling Simon how he burned his hands. Anyway, back to the main plot. Frankenstein realizes that a professor at the asylum has hanged himself, and so he uses that opportunity to steal his body and cut out his brain and transplant it to the monster. The monster, after having his brain transplanted, goes through all 5 stages of grief in the span of the next few minutes. But it's done in a way that you actually kind of feel sorry for him. It gets to a point that one day, when Simon's trying to feed him, he tries to stab the monster, but the monster tries to kill him, only stopping when Sarah appears in the room. The two barely manage to escape the monster's grasp, but that night, the monster escapes and goes on a rampage throughout the asylum. Eventually, the monster kills the director of the asylum, aka Sarah's father, Adolf Klaus, played by John Stratton, by stabbing him in the throat with a broken bottle. But when I tell you this, you might be cheering for the monster. Adolf raped Sarah, his own daughter. Anyway, the monster lumbers into a room where the asylum prisoners are and tries to kill him, but one of the guards shoots him in the groin and in the chest. As the monster lumbers about in agony, he sees Sarah and tries to touch her one last time, but the angry mob of prisoners beat him up and rip him to shreds. Frankenstein arrives, clears everybody out, and cleans out the scene before thinking of a new experiment and what he should do next. Overall, while it's a lot better than Horror Frankenstein, it's still kind of a mediocre movie. It ain't bad by any means, but it's the 7th film in the series, and it'd be pretty tired out by this point. It's just how it goes, okay? Overall, I rate this movie a 6.75 out of 10.